I think focusing on building trust and building relationships is your primary focus. The influence is actually kind of like a byproduct in a way. And almost if you are going into it with the perspective of wanting to achieve influence, you kind of inherently will miss it. So it's elusive in that way. But if you focus on building relationships, building trust, making people feel seen and heard and understood, the influence will flow. And it'll flow so naturally and freely, you won't even actually realize it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Uncut Design podcast, where I speak with design leaders at Microsoft who are shaping the future of user experiences. In this series, we'll explore their unique approaches, lessons learned, and insights on driving impactful design in an ever-evolving industry. Today, my guest is Jennifer Hahn. Jennifer is a design program manager at Microsoft, where she works on the Azure Cloud Experiences Studio. In our conversation, we talk about how to lead and influence team members without formal authority, navigating resistance to your design visions, strategies for fostering ownership amongst team members, and so much more. I was very lucky to connect with Jennifer after another colleague recommended that we chat, so I'm extremely excited to have her featured on this episode. Jennifer is well known across teams for her ability to influence and lead others despite not holding a leadership position. Her insights and approach to collaboration is a refreshing recipe for success, and I can't wait to share it with you all. So with that, I bring you Jennifer Hahn.
Hello.
Hey Jennifer, how are you doing?
How are you?
Doing good. Doing good.
I'm a minute or two late because I went to go grab the headphones because I've heard that the audio quality is better on these puppies. So
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Just for starters, I want to know if you could kind of give us like a little bit of an intro or like background into how you got into design and how that kind of led to you now being at Microsoft.
Yeah, so I would say I, like a lot of people, stumbled into design, especially user experience design. Back in school, I was studying information systems, and we often describe it as like the child of computer science and business. It's this like mix between the two of them. And my program was really great because it allowed for you to explore and go deep in the areas that you wanted to. So it was people had different like specializations or focus areas that they would dive into. So some went into computer science, some went into tech consulting. But with something that's also very broad, you kind of get overwhelmed. You're like, I don't really know where I want to specialize. And so for a few years, I was exploring a software engineering route. And it wasn't until I was working on a project with a professor, we were designing an educational game to teach second and third graders how to read musical notes on a staff. There's this whole like alien Martian music invasion aspect to it. And we originally scoped it to be a semester, and we scoped, I think, like 2 or 3 weeks for design. And let me just tell you, design ended up taking like 6 to 8 weeks. And we ended up extending to a whole nother semester because we spent the whole first semester doing the design. And then the second half of the semester, for the second half of the year, we would actually implement it. But I think it gets at something that's really exciting about design, which is that there's so much that you think you know, but until you talk to the user and put it in front of them, you really don't. And there's this kind of humble posture that clearly me and my partner didn't have because we thought we could hammer it out in 2-3 weeks, that we really discovered through that project. It was also really fun to see how we would think about what would be fun for a second grader, and we would think about what would be boring for a second grader and try and design for that. But we were so pleasantly surprised so many times in our playtesting session. So we actually would do paper playtesting, so lots of drawing and coloring of all of the graphics and then moving them around with the kids. It was so exciting, but that's where I really got my first taste of what design really was. And so when I was looking at jobs and roles coming out of college, I was really looking for user-focused product management type of roles. So designing technology for human beings and people to use, and maybe a little bit less of a focus on the back end or implementation side. So that front end facing product development was something that was exciting to me.
It's awesome. I'm curious, how did you make yourself stand out from other candidates in such a competitive field?
Yeah, that's a good question. If anyone is in that phase right now of job applications or applying to roles, like I feel you. It feels like you are sending your applications and resumes into a black hole, and figuring out how to stand out is really hard. So first of all, acknowledging like this is really challenging, and sometimes who you will stand out to will be at one company and then you might just be passed by another company. I honestly was looking at this question. I was like, I don't know what I did to stand out, but I can share from the other side, perhaps, of having been on the interviewer side. I can share maybe what stands out to me. And I've now used that in interviews when I'm in that process again. And the biggest thing I would say is baseline, of course, the skill sets, the expertise needs to be there. But, there's tons and tons of other candidates that also have incredible design skills and they're talented or they're incredible programmers and whatnot. So the biggest thing that stands out to me is when people really know how to tell their story well, and they take their story that may be unconventional and they really articulate why they bring unique skill sets to your team that no one else could. So, the story I always tell is we were interviewing a candidate that definitely wasn't from a traditional design trained background, came into design a little bit later. So honestly, compared to other candidates, they had maybe a little bit less refined design expertise, but they used to be a dev and they used to be a PM. And this candidate, she sold us so beautifully on how she would bring a unique perspective, having been literally working in those roles and understanding that the PM and the dev are some of design's key partners, that she could bring a different perspective that someone that we hired straight out of design school wouldn't bring that perspective. And that is the pinnacle example I always think back to and I always share with people, because what could have been a weaker point of her background and maybe would have made her less of a great candidate, she actually shared with us and articulated why she was actually a unique candidate. And so for everyone looking at your background, whether you used to be in nursing. I was talking to a lady the other day who was a nurse and was looking to get into design. And it was like the inherent empathy that you have as a nurse that translates into caring about the user, right? So everyone look at your backgrounds and all of the twisty, windy paths for how you get to where you are now and figure out like what unique superpowers did you pick up along the way that someone else might not bring to the table. So that's something that always stands out to me and is something that I always think about too if I'm interviewing or whatnot. Think about how to tell your story and play those superpowers into how you share.
Yeah, I love that. It really is, at the end of the day, like all about being intentional and crafting your personal brand. And I think we all have that aspect to us. It's just, it'll take some time. You got to kind of sit down, think how to phrase it. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So, what's something about design that's clear to you, but you don't think is quite as clear to others?
Yeah, this was such an interesting question because I think that in the past maybe couple of years, there's a lot more awareness that I think a lot of people have about design. I think maybe a decade ago, the concept of maybe traditional design was a little bit more understood, but especially user experience design was maybe less prominent or less understood. I think that something that I've felt, and I don't know if this is isn't quite clear to others, but it's one that I didn't discover until having been in this space, is that there's a really undetected relationship that as a designer, I think you have with whoever you're designing for, which we talk about like personas and this question of like, who is the user? We ask ourselves that all the time. Who's the customer? But there really is this like care and attention and empathy that is so prominent in the relationship that as a designer you have with your user. And the same way that with a loved one, you're constantly thinking about, I wonder like how they're feeling, what they're thinking about, what's top of mind for them. It's similar in a lot of ways to how a designer or a researcher thinks about who the person on the other side is and what they're feeling, how they might be feeling on a certain screen when they're lost, what that experience is like. And I think that's maybe an unknown, like soft part of our role, is that really like tender relationship almost that we have with our users that maybe they know about, but maybe not, that so much consideration has gone into every moment that is designed for. Even in something like, we designed for the Azure portal here at Microsoft, even something that is as clear and tactical as maybe deploying a deployment flow for a resource. There's so many emotional moments that are created, how you feel supported when the right piece of text comes on screen at the right time. There's these moments that are created, and I would say the designer or researcher has this kind of unknown, really interesting relationship with constantly thinking about who's on the other side.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. I think it's, I can't remember where I heard this, but I believe Satya was the one who said that its core design is applied empathy. And that really resonates because that is our job, really, is like thinking about everything through the user, advocating for them at all points of the software development process. But I think a lot of designers often kind of get trapped or pigeonholed in just advocating for the user. So I'm curious, how do you navigate that balance between user needs and business goals in your work?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. My first initial thought and reaction is that I think that sometimes we often will view these two things as in contention with each other. And there is an aspect of consideration of tuning the balance between these things, which we'll get to in a bit. But I think that initially, my first thought is that there are opportunities to find where the user wins and the business wins. And in fact, if the user is winning, the business is going to win as well. And so it's so interesting because this concept is often talked about where, you have to balance between these kind of two, it feels like these two opposing forces or opposite sides of the spectrum. And maybe that's a result of experiences that we've had with consumer products that feel more exploitative in some way, or are optimizing purely for a capitalist business goal around ROI. But the approach, especially in design, that we think about is when the user is satisfied, the business will grow because the user will continue to stay, they'll continue to use, they'll explore more. There's this positive relationship that's built with the company that then allows the company to grow. And I think we see this a lot more, especially I think maybe in the consumer product space, where there's these brand loyalties, cult followings that are so prominent. But that concept is true, which is that the user is happy and the business is growing because they've been able to retain that user base so loyally. That being said, likely we have experienced the other side of this, which is feeling like we are being upsold, or constantly our data or whatnot is being taken advantage of. And so I've encountered this a lot more recently in some of the work that I've been doing around cross-selling within our product experiences. How do we drive revenue and help customers discover other services they can be using? And there is a delicate balance between pushing too heavily, and in that case the user is not happy, and candidly your business is not going to grow because no one wants to feel like they're being sold to, right? The used car salesman analogy kind of works here. It's when it's too aggressive, you kind of back away. And I think this is a place where design and research is really able to shine, because when there are competing forces at play here of the business wanting to push harder to grow adoption of a new service, whatever it might be, elegant, well-designed experiences can still achieve those outcomes, but maybe not in the medium that maybe feels like it's aggressive. And that, again, moment making that designers and researchers can create really helps us get to the same goals. To the business, maybe the outcomes are the same, but how does it feel? What's the delivery of it? And that's where design can really shine. So there is a tuning and there is a insights driven way to constantly see and monitor. So if something's not performing well, turn that off, get that out of there, swap in a different design treatment that you can run an experiment on and really validate and test.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it's definitely like a big misconception almost of at these big companies, like the higher you go up in leadership, the less and less like design is thought about or valued. And maybe it's just unique to Microsoft or, big tech, but I think that it's definitely, at least in recent years, improved a ton. And, they're thinking about design and it has a seat at the table. So it's definitely nice to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so true. We're seeing more companies really become more and more design driven. And I think like some of these, especially consumer focused companies or, brands that have really built out really beautiful experiences in the space and seen the ROI of it, other companies are starting to follow suit. It's exciting to see.
Definitely.
Yeah.
How do you define the difference between like a generalist and a specialist in design? And then how do you see yourself on that spectrum?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I would say so I'm a design PM. So I'm a kind of product manager within a design space and within a design organization. And I think inherently as a product manager, you are more of a generalist in comparison to someone who is a designer or a researcher and are very skilled and knee deep in a specific area. As a product manager, you're often connecting multiple different expertises together, figuring out when we use and leverage which muscle to accomplish this goal at a certain time, and kind of charting what that vision could look like for whatever product direction we're looking to achieve. And so I would definitely say probably I fall more on the generalist side of the spectrum. But I also feel like as a generalist, there are special areas that I think is valuable for you to index on. So for me, I've often been really interested in investing a lot in the data and analytics space. So I can be a PM, but the domain area that you've built up kind of a special knowledge base on can be in a specific area. I think a true generalist may be diluted, like when there really isn't an index or a bent that you have, then you're kind of like everything to everyone, but not anything really valuable to anyone, right? So even like what some people might label as a generalist, they might have a superpower in connecting across the organization because they have those relationships built out and they understand how the org connects together. So you would argue that their specialization might be in seeing that larger organizational structure and really influencing direction based on structural changes or operational changes. So my manager right now is a great example of that, like his knee-deep knowledge on how all of the machinery works behind running an organization. He's maybe not an expert in a domain area, but he's an expert in organizational structure for us to go forward most efficiently and connect all the people in the right places, right? So my thought is perhaps there isn't a true generalist. We're all specialists in some way because of like where we have built out maybe expertise in, but there definitely are in the corporate space these specializations in how their disciplines are defined. So someone who is a designer or a researcher or an engineer is definitely playing a very specific role in a very specific discipline that fits into the product development process. So that's, I think, how we maybe traditionally think about specializations. I would say the second part of your question is identifying your specialization early in your career or not. It's helpful, I've found, to have something that you've gone deep into purely for the experience of understanding what it looks like to dive deeply in a specific knowledge area. That doesn't mean you need to stay there, but that's advice that I received like early on when I was in college and choosing internships and whatnot. And I found it really helpful to know what it feels like to go deeply into something, and also to establish for yourself that muscle of being able to go deep and really invest in an area. And then you can always pick yourself up again, and you've built that muscle that you can apply it to whatever next thing that you're most interested in. Now, the counterpoint to this is some careers definitely require years and years and decades, perhaps, of deep knowledge in an area. So you definitely make trade-offs here, but I would recommend go deep in an area. You don't have to stick to it, but to try and to know that you can and know what that feels and looks like gives you and equips you with the muscle to apply that anywhere. And so that is exciting and useful for you. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I think that we always go back and refer from those past experience and pull things that are relevant, and it always ends up to help benefit you and, ultimately build that personal brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
When you lack like a formal leadership role, what strategies do you use to ensure that your voice is heard and your contributions are recognized within the team?
This is such a fabulous question. This concept of influencing without authority or leading without authority is so fascinating, because I think it is, as we look at organizations that are healthier and healthier, they have way more of this versus organizations that maybe are more top-down focused, more established with power structures in place. And so, as I was thinking about this a lot more the past couple of days, I was thinking about like the contrast between influence versus authority. Authority is inherently not relational in nature. If you think about systems of authority in society, in history, they often are a people group or a person that is leading with kind of no care for the people that they are leading, right? And so you think about systems of oppression, they often look like this, but there's a power dynamic at play here, right? So they're not relational. And then you think about influence, and there is such a trust that is essential for influence to happen. And it is trust that is actually not demanded. It is freely given by the other party. And so it's not actually something that I can force upon you, but you make the decision to trust me. And then therefore, that is the prerequisite for my influence to even have any open channel over the other person, right? So I was thinking about how influence is inherently relational. And if you want to have influence over someone, there is a deep care and understanding that is required first to just open that pathway. And then from there, that influence can freely flow. So I was thinking about this most because I saw this happen a lot with some friends as of late. Just recently did a friend visit, and one of my friends was big into her walking pad that she uses at work. And she highly influenced my friend, who was like so opposed to it beforehand. But out of that relational trust that one of my friends had in the other, she was willing to even consider the possibilities of buying a walking pad, when you're willing to listen to people that you trust and that care about you, and it opens up those channels. And so I do feel like a big part of, when you lack that formal leadership role or authority role that's been given, you have full freedom to build trust and a relationship with people. And from there, the influence will flow. And so I think focusing on building trust and building relationships is your primary focus. The influence is actually kind of like a byproduct in a way. And almost if you are going into it with the perspective of wanting to achieve influence, you kind of inherently will miss it. So it's elusive in that way. But if you focus on building relationships, building trust, making people feel seen and heard and understood, the influence will flow, and it'll flow so naturally and freely, you won't even actually realize it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I couldn't agree more. The trust piece really goes a long way, and making sure that everything's cohesive within the team, and everything moves smoothly. So I love that answer.
Yeah, yeah. Funny because I think like we as human beings are so smart and intelligent, and we know when someone genuinely cares and when someone is looking to just build connection with you versus when they want something or there is that authoritative feeling. Like we're so intuitive as human beings in that way that we can sniff it out so quickly. Yeah.
Awesome. How do you foster a sense of ownership and commitment among team members when you're guiding a project without having that designated leadership position?
Yeah, this is a really important question, especially in our corporate spaces where we're constantly working with people all the time in every type of role. I would say a sense of ownership and commitment. This can be hard, and it's especially hard when you are trying to advocate for something that is transformational in your organization. You know, I think it's easy to do this perhaps when there's a directive top down to go and do something and you kind of have that permission laid out for you or that sense of commitment laid out for you because it's kind of being delivered with the kind of the whip instead of the carrot, right? But I think one thing that I've seen be really successful and again builds that relationship is seeing where the people around you are able to shine and carving out space for them to shine. This is the most effective and most inspiring way for people to feel a sense of ownership over their piece of the larger project. Oftentimes maybe the tendency is to feel like there's this one center of gravity that is this like charismatic like leader that, you know, gathers everyone around and then we run in a direction. But I think the even more impactful version looks like a charismatic leader that can see their team members clearly, see their superpowers, carve out specific areas that they can drive on, and then they say to them, go run with it. You know, like you have the skill sets. I'm here to guide you, but go run with it. Because I didn't know anyone who's worked in a team, it's not motivating when you're like given something very prescriptive, but when you're given a kind of like a plot of land and the freedom to till that land, garden it, build and grow something there, and you have got creative freedom, that's really exciting and motivating, and you feel proud of the space that you've been able to take care of. And of course, this is also aligned to ideally a skill set that you have or an expertise that you have. So you're not, you know, thrown onto a plot of land and figure out how to till it and not knowing how. But I think that's one big thing is giving people the space to shine and then aligning their skill sets to it and letting them run with it. It's the fastest way to build commitment from people.
Yeah, that's so great. I think in my short time here at Microsoft, it's been apparent, and I know a lot of the managers is just extremely team oriented and really giving them that runway to be creative and, you know, do what they were hired for and not really micromanage or have that trust in them that they're going to execute and come back with, you know, something of value and not just, you know, straddle away or sit on their hands. So it's definitely, it plays into that trust as well.
Yeah, for sure. And there is this like delicate balance between giving them freedom to run and steward, but also enough like direction that they feel supported or they have a vision to run in. Sometimes too much space feels kind of daunting because you don't know where to even begin. And so this is also tuned to who the person is. Some people really love, like, give them a wide open piece of land and they'll figure it out and they actually get energy from that. Other people, that's too much. It's overwhelming and they love, you know, a fenced around space, but then they can till within that. So kind of tuning it to what you see people are feeling anxious by or feel like drawing energy from, I think is constantly being observant of that is helpful too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
When you encounter when you encounter resistance to your design ideas, how do you adapt your approach to effectively communicate the value of your vision?
Yeah, this is a fun question because resistance is inevitable, because if you look at an organization, every part of the organization is playing a specific role. So if you think about like a large piece of machinery, each one is playing a different role, and inevitably they are going to bump up against each other. And when the objectives are aligned, you feel that, momentum. But part of this healthy balancing and tension of our space is that the outcome will be the best version of it because it's not indexed to one discipline or the other. So you see this a lot with like design, PM, and dev. Each has a slight bent for what's important to the customer, and they are all needed. But if we kind of over index on one or the other, we maybe run in a different direction. So there's healthy resistance and balancing. When it comes to figuring out how to communicate within these dynamics, I think really understanding where the countering opinions are coming from helps to diffuse the feeling of resistance. Like resistance doesn't feel fun sometimes, especially when you're stressed and overwhelmed and you're pressed on all sides. Like the last thing you need is someone saying like, "Oh, I don't think so," or "We should do it differently." And your natural defense mechanism is to like dig your heels in too and, bump up against the resistance. But it's hard. I struggle with this too. My natural inclination sometimes when you're like pressed on all sides to like, all right, let's have at it. But taking the time to stop and consider or try and understand why they're pushing back. And I was humbled so wonderfully a couple of months ago when I realized that the resistance was actually like the better idea, like the perspective that was being shared from the PM that I was working with was genuinely such a good point that like I didn't know, and I didn't have the context to even know that that was a better option than what I was proposing. So more of those instances is always great. It really like helps humble you fast when you can remember back to an instance when you were humbled. But I think taking the time to know why they're pushing back and genuinely having the space to consider if it's a good idea or not. And even when it's not a good idea, when you negotiate, you can better negotiate by showcasing that you understand where they're coming from. And again, they're much more likely to listen to you as well. And so taking that time to step back, it's really hard. I have to admit, it's really hard because we're humans. But sometimes it's okay to just like end the meeting and be like, okay, let's revisit this tomorrow and not get into it. Because kind of the thing with resistance is that when both are pushing back, you end up just kind of in the stalemate state, and then to snap out of that is hard. Anyone who's gotten to a fight with like their family members or their significant others knows exactly this dynamic. It's the same in the corporate space. Honestly, it is the same. So a lot of those tactics you might use in your personal life also really do work in the corporate space as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much value in just taking a deep breath, taking a step back, and really letting what they said marinate, and look at it with an open mind.
Yeah.
What have you found to be the most powerful skills or behaviors that help you drive change and influence outcomes when you're not in that leadership role?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because driving change by default is disruptive and it is ushering in transformation. And I think in order to do this well, you have to have discovered or unearthed something that you believe in and have the vision for it. Oftentimes, I think maybe we think or index heavily on like, I want to drive change, but without the time and discovery phase first to understand your organization deeply, the product space deeply, it's hard to have that vision be founded in something that truly can be transformational. And so I often will recommend thinking kind of one click like before this phase, which is spend time deeply to just like learn everything you can about your product space or your organization. your vision will come when you are diving deep into the nitty-gritty details, the day in and day out experiences of the people around you, hearing the common problems that exist. And oftentimes you will notice that there are patterns. People will mention the same pain point again and again that they find really frustrating or difficult. And where you see patterns is usually where there's something that can be transformed. So it's ironic because similar to influence being a byproduct, I actually think vision is a byproduct of like listening and really just being steeped in an environment for a long period of time, to the point where you will see the patterns and you will notice them. Once you've identified a space where you're like, I constantly hear people talking about this, or we constantly hear from our customers about X, Y, and Z, then comes the fun part of the vision piece, which is really figure out like what could the future look like here. And one way to approach this is to like kind of dream up possibilities and brainstorm possibilities. But one thing that I've also found really helpful is to, again, research outside of your organization. Maybe it's your direct sub-organization within your company, or even in other companies. Read about them, because you might not be able to replicate exactly what's happening in other organizations, but it'll spark and open up ideas that you wouldn't have had on your own. Obviously, your own ideas are going to be fabulous and amazing, but if you want to spark like truly like transformational thinking, it's kind of like doors in your brain that need to be open to different hallways and rooms. And the best way to do this is to read and learn what other places are doing that you're like, I didn't even think of that, And I think this is where if you think about like art, or in kind of like the creative space, like people talk about like go to museums, be inspired, like be stimulated by other things, and it really opens you up to other possibilities. I think the same case is true in our corporate spaces or in our product spaces. So I would say maybe like 3 phases. First phase is just spend time in discovery, listening, understanding. 2 is understanding where the patterns are, where there's common areas of pain, frustration, solving those problems for people that you've identified. And then 3 would be read and understand and be stimulated by things outside of your direct environment, because that is where you'll get inspiration. You often, if you're too steeped in one environment or one view, you will only optimize within that specific view. And that's inherently going to be a little less transformational than something that can be brought in that's really fresh. Now, there's often a second part of this, which is fitting what you feel is transformational within what's feasible in your current context. That's a very real part. So don't come in with the like, let's wipe the slate clean and just rebuild, right? You have to rebuild within your context, but the ideas are fresh. And so, yeah, that's what I would think about when it comes to how you might consistently drive change or influence transformation.
Yeah, that's a lot of value said there. And I think a big piece of it is taking the time to actually see like what have others done within this space, because oftentimes there is some work out there. And, you're not the very first to market with this idea, but getting some just general thoughts around what worked well for them, adopting maybe some of those areas, dropping what didn't work, and kind of adapting it for your specific use case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you don't hold a formal authority position, how do you approach collaborative decision making to ensure that your ideas are being integrated into the final outcome?
This is a good question. When I think about collaborative decision making, I often think about there being many, many voices in the room. That's like the image that comes to mind, is like you're in a meeting and there's like 7 different opinions, and we need to finally align on a direction, but there's like 7 different versions of how we should approach it. And so navigating a space where there's many voices is an interesting space to be in, but it's where we always land often in here in corporate. I would say one thing that comes to mind is figuring out where there is like pockets where there's common denominators of aligned objectives. So therefore you can begin to get closer to alignment. So if there's, say, another dev that you see in the room that has like kind of a similar opinion to you and whatnot, there's value in being able to kind of offer your support for their ideas, especially if it's similar in line with yours. Instead of continuing to advocate for like the design perspective, just like link up arms with the other people that you see have similar ways of viewing the problem that we're all trying to figure out together. It diffuses that feeling of there being many cooks in the kitchen immediately, and there's modeling that's now happening of support and alignment and coming together behavior. And sometimes, honestly, there's like a trickle effect that immediately changes the tone of the conversation of like, well, from my discipline's perspective, it's like this. And from my team's perspective, when even one person says, no, I actually really love the point that Dev A said over here, and I think that's a really good idea, it shifts the tone, and you'll see that there's a softening and there's a willingness for other disciplines to say, oh, actually, that's a really good point that you brought up here. Maybe there's a way that we can now bring these things together. So kind of being the person in the room that can begin to shift the mood, shift the temperature, shift the vibe is sometimes like a big role that like people might not even recognize it for, but the end result is we got to where we need to go, So it's sometimes very subtle and maybe even not noticeable. Actually, the most effective is when it's not noticed, but you really can shift, and then you can see it happening too. And it's kind of exciting to see like, man, we started this meeting maybe a little bit on opposite sides of the table, and we're ending it even a little bit closer together. And sometimes you don't land in the final conclusion yet, but you made steps in a better direction. You're like, okay, let's pick this up tomorrow. But you've progressed towards collaboration instead of kind of being in contention.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think we can definitely kind of get trapped in that, being like so attached to our decision or our point of view on a specific product or how we should execute. Right? And I think it's very valuable, like when you take that step back and realize like we're all trying to create that best experience for the customer here, and we all have these strengths. How can we leverage them? And almost like a Venn diagram, like what's the center point of all this?
Yes, exactly. Nice.
What can designers that are early in their career start doing differently right now to begin building some of these leadership habits?
Oh, that's a really great question. Early in career, I would say one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was early in my career is from a mentor. And she was like 3 years older than I was. And so it was kind of the perfect age difference or career stage difference, because she was a little bit more ahead of me and can share back learnings, but also not so far removed from what it felt like to be new that she couldn't relate to me. So something that she told me was sometimes the difference between going from good to great is knowing how what you're working on connects outside of your space. And I think about that all the time. And especially, I think it was a game changer early in career to have that lens. The tendency when you're early in career is to focus on the scope that you've been given and to do it well. And you should do that. That is your P0 priority, is just execute with incredible quality on the things that you have been given. But as you think about wanting to grow and becoming a leader, being able to pick your head up out of the space that you've been given that is very scope and very defined, and seeing where, even knowing where your product connects to or where your project connects to other products, that larger view is often what leaders have this like wider lens for. And if you look at, the leaders of our organizations, their lens is incredibly wide, both within our multitude of product spaces within their portfolio, but also how the company is fitting into the larger industry, right? So beginning to train your lenses to think a little bit wider and beginning to build relationships with teams that are similar to yours, or connection points, or connecting those dots, is going to help you grow faster, because you're looking wider than just your small space. So I often find that can be the tendencies, because you're just like, it's a lot to do, like start your job and navigate your careers and stuff. So you just want to do what you have well, but look beyond. So if we think about that metaphor or analogy that we were talking about earlier around, oftentimes you've been carved out, like a plot of land for you to till and take care of. Maybe it's your features or your product space that you're defining. But picking up your head up, look at the horizon, look at, like, there's mountains over there, there's lakes over there, there's the horizon and the sun setting over there. Now you can see maybe other areas you're interested in, other people that are going to be working on similar things to you. So picking your head up, I think, is the biggest thing. So finding the difference between good to great is often how your work connects outward, is some of the great advice that's really been helpful for me. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I'll mention that I think I learned later on, and maybe a little bit in retrospect, and this was from a manager of mine, as I was growing, maybe in early to middle phase career, is when you start leading, because inevitably at a certain point you go from executing on what you've been given, you're starting to lead some initiatives, but there's a point when you're leading initiatives where you want to do it all because you know so much about it and you care so deeply and you don't want to see things fail. And so you feel this sense of ownership over the thing that you're leading, but beginning to learn how to give it away and involving other people into it and letting them shine, and like giving this concept of giving it away so that it can grow beyond yourself is really interesting. So if you think about parenting, it's kind of like this too. Like a parent wants to like take care of their child and make sure that they can kind of control the environments to keep their child safe because they care so deeply. But a parent needs to learn to let their child like spread its wings and fly so it can go and be independent. Same thing for things that you're leading. Success is when your initiative doesn't need you anymore because so many people are involved in it. It's got maturity and operational stability, and it doesn't need you. And if you were to leave, it doesn't need you. That is when you've really done it, and you can now expand and go do other things or whatever it might be. But that is the success state, is to give it away, and it's now bigger than you can even fathom it to be.
No, yeah, I really love that response. It definitely resonates. I think that it's, oftentimes some people can fall into like that just trap of feeling like it's almost a competition or wanting credit for, certain pieces almost to like one up others, but at the end of the day, like you got to really zoom out and see that this is like a team sport. And if you're not like team players really win the championships, in any sport. So it's like, if you're able to recognize that early on, I think there's so much, upside for your career.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's challenging, but once you experienced it once, you kind of like get to see something shine without you in it anymore. And it's kind of exciting, you're like, man, it's running and rolling. And you kind of feel like a proud parent seeing it just rolling down the hill. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. So, well, that brings us to our lightning round questions. So just kind of rapid fire questions here, and feel free to take as much time as you'd like for each one. So I'll start it off with what's like a favorite book you've read that you would recommend others?
This one came to mind immediately. It's Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. It's about a World War II vet who was an Olympian. His name's Louis Zamperini. It's kind of this mix between kind of biography, but also the storytelling is so vibrant that you feel like you're reading a novel, but then you're constantly like, no, but this really happened. So I just remember reading this book back in college and I could not put it down. Like people talk about like, oh my God, I could not put this book down. I really could not put this book down. I think I read it for like hours straight, like show up to class after class. I'm like reading it again. So that feeling of being sucked into a world, I remember so distinctly with this book. So I feel like I have to recommend this one.
That's awesome. I love those books that like they're just so difficult to put down, and I have to check that out for sure.
It's really intense. It's a really intense story, but it's a really beautiful story as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. What's a movie or show that you've fallen in love with recently?
Oh, all right. I'm a big movie fan, big movie buff. So I loved that this question was on here. A show that a movie that I've been recommending people to watch lately is called The Harder They Fall. It's written and directed by James Samuel. He is an artist, a musical artist originally, kind of a hip hop rapper. And he just had this, like visual sensibility about his artistic and creative ideas. And this movie is about Black cowboys. It's a story about, generations. It's about vengeance. There's this concept of honor in here, and there's a lot of family dynamics. There's a love story. So there's some really great like action sequences. But what's most exciting and neat about this movie is that you really feel the influence of the musicality of the director on the way that it's shot and the way that the score adds to the rhythmic feel of it. And I've just never experienced that in a movie the way that I have with this one. It is such a good time. Some real great zingers and funny parts, big action, big storytelling. So it's on Netflix, I believe. Highly recommend. Idris Elba's in here. Regina King, Lakeith Stanfield, like stacked cast as well. It's a good time.
I'll definitely have to add that to my list. I'm like such a noob when it comes to movies. Like I just started getting into like the Christopher Nolan movies, and this is definitely sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to watch that.
Nice.
This is
yes.
Probably a good time to ask about your podcast, which you mentioned earlier. Would you mind telling us a little bit more?
Yeah, so I host a film podcast with a good friend of mine. We've been doing it for like 6 years now, which is absolutely insane. But it's called Movies and Us podcast. We basically cover a film every week, and we review, we discuss the themes, the characters, the storytelling, and just we've been always so excited by how much movies open up conversations with people, and your reactions and what characters you love are so neat to see different people's thoughts and opinions about it. And it's been such a cool way to open up conversation. So we'll often have guests that come on that are like in the movie world, and some of them are just people that we've met that have really interesting ideas. So Movies and Us pod.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to listen to that. That's so crazy. I took a film class in college, and like ever since then I've just it was just one class as the intro. Nothing too crazy, but it just shifts your perspective of how you like watch a movie and what you think about, questions you ask yourself. It's so amazing.
Yeah. That's awesome. What's a movie that you've fallen in love with recently? While we're geeking out about movies together.
Yeah, I would have to say, as I mentioned, so the Christopher Nolan movies have been great. I think, honestly, Tenet, I'd say, is crazy. Like, I had to watch it twice, and then I was like, okay, I think I understand, but let me watch like a YouTube review of what happened. But I love those type of movies that like make you think, and Christopher Nolan's great with that.
Yes, he's got some big ideas. That movie is like an intellectual workout. I felt the same thing after watching the first time. I was like, I think I got it. I don't really know, but I think nope, I don't got it. I don't got it. It's a good time though. Nice.
That's awesome. I'll have to tap into your podcast, and I'll probably reach out to you for like some recommendations.
Yes. Sounds good. Cool.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a piece of feedback that really resonated with you. So do you have a piece of feedback that you wish you would have received early in career?
Oh, good question. I think one that I had heard, but I think didn't really resonate with me until later. And now I think about this visual all the time is someone had told me like your career is not a ladder, it's a jungle gym. And I really I really love that. And I think I can feel how much that like really impacted me a lot now, that I maybe didn't realize at the time. So I'd heard it like way early on, but just didn't internalize it as much. But I think it takes the pressure off of feeling like every step needs to be in a right, whatever right means, right direction for growing your career. And it alleviates the pressure and allows you to just have more of this freedom to explore and take side steps that then you learn something that helped you in your next step. Like there's a desire, I think, when you're like young and ambitious and you think about your career to want to like chart it. You know, you want to like have a path forward that you can see, that you're running in a direction. And the reality, I think, looks a lot more like a jungle gym. So just that alleviation of pressure and the freedom to explore and play and try things and kind of take detours, I think was like unconsciously helpful for me at the time that I didn't even realize, but I can see now how much that helped. And now I really adopt that now too. So I still find myself wanting to like figure out what the direction is that I'm running in. And I have to remind myself things are constantly changing and shifting in our landscapes, in who you are and what you care about, what you're excited by, new passions that you've discovered. And you can't plan for those. Like this whole data and analytics thing, I had no idea. I could not plan that. And it was just kind of through discovery and chasing things that were exciting to you that you kind of uncover these areas of opportunity. So the jungle gym visual is ingrained in my brain now, and it's play, you know, like kids are playing on a jungle gym. So our careers, we can feel that same feeling of play too.
Yeah, no, it definitely resonates. I love that advice.
Yeah.
I have two last quick questions before I let you go, and I kept you here long enough. But yeah, I wanted to ask, is there a product that you've discovered recently that you fell in love with?
Oh, this is a great question. Any kind of product, like
Yeah, mobile app, web app, it could be anything. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know if this is not a tech product of any kind, but I recently discovered moringa powder. This is so random, but it is a superfood, and it is primarily in kind of Eastern countries, and has like started trickling over into the Western hemisphere. And there's all these really great, like interesting health benefits and whatnot. And there's a lot of like nutrients and calcium and whatnot. So anyway, it's been a recent discovery, and I've been putting it in my oatmeal every morning, and I've been telling all my friends about it because I'm like, you need to get on this. It's so easy. It's similar. People compare it to matcha in flavor, but I think it's a little bit grassier of a flavor than matcha is, but highly recommend. I don't know if that's so not an app or a website, but definitely a product that I've been loving and recently discovered and telling everybody about.
No, that's great. Honestly, funny enough, my mom actually, she would always have moringa powder like in our cabinets, and I think she like put it in her smoothies, and she'd like, it. Honestly, this is like in high school, middle school, but like I was not a fan. It kind of tasted like very greeny. Like I think my taste buds have matured a bit more, so I'll maybe have to try it out again. But
yeah, the test I always ask people is like, if you like matcha, your chances of liking moringa powder is a little bit higher. But if you don't like matcha, I would not recommend this to you, because it's similar in that like you taste the earth feeling. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then lastly, I wanted to ask, where can people find you? I know you mentioned you have the podcast, but they want to reach out or connect.
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn. You can just search me, Jennifer Hahn. I don't think there's very many of us, but there might be a couple. If you just search Jennifer Hahn Microsoft, I'm sure I'll pop up. I'm wearing like a light blue top in case that's useful. And then I'm on social. I don't really use it often, so I'm on Instagram. I think my handle is jennifer.han266, but not as active on there. And then, yeah, the pod. So Movies and Us. You can connect with us there if you want to geek out about movies with us together. But probably the best bet to get a hold of me might be LinkedIn, easiest.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet. This is amazing. Surpassed any expectations I had. So happy that Joe recommended that we reach out and talk. So thank
Love
you.
it. Thank you. And yeah, thank you for like hosting and doing this whole podcast series. I think it's going to really be valuable for so many people, just to hear all of these different perspectives. So props to you for making this happen, taking the initiative, building this out. It's no small task.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think we're at 10 episodes total. So I'm going to try to execute on all those. But yeah.
Nice. Very cool.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.